Please stand for the reading of God's Word. Our passage this morning is 2 Samuel 3, 31 through 39. Then David said to Joab and to all the people who were with him, "Tear your clothes and put on sackcloth and mourn before Abner." And King David followed the bier. They buried Abner at Hebron, and the king lifted up his voice and wept at the grave of Abner, and all the people wept. And the king lamented for Abner, saying, "Should Abner die as a fool dies? Your hands were not bound, your feet were not fettered. As one falls before the wicked, you have fallen." And all the people wept again over him. Then all the people came to persuade David to eat bread while it was yet day. But David swore, saying, "God do so to me, and more also, if I taste bread or anything else till the sun goes down." And all the people took notice of it, and it pleased them, as everything that the king did pleased all the people. So all the people and all Israel understood that day that it had not been the king's will to put to death Abner the son of Ner. And the king said to his servants, "Do you not know that a prince and a great man has fallen this day in Israel? And I was gentle today. Though anointed king, these men, the sons of Zeruiah, are more severe than I. The Lord repay the evildoer according to his wickedness." You may be seated.
Our hope is that as you prepare for meeting with us on a Sunday morning, you've taken time to read through these sections. And we're going through bigger chunks of the Bible right now. We've switched from preaching through some things in the New Testament, and now we're in the Old Testament, and we're in a book of the Bible that are probably some familiar stories to you, because maybe you did hear about them in Sunday school, or maybe you have gone through the Bible and you've read these things before. But more than likely, if you read these, you're going to go, "I didn't remember this." And so we are studying bigger chunks of this book of the Bible, 2 Samuel. We're looking at chapters 2, 3, and 4 this morning, which is a big chunk. I didn't want Paul to read all that, and I can't adequately walk through every verse there. So what I'm hoping you're doing is you're reading through it maybe a couple times so that you're familiar enough with it that when we come, I don't have to, you're not lost the entire time. And I recognize that's one of the problems of going through bigger pictures stuff. But the reason I'm doing a bigger picture is so that we can get to things like this. Because if I went through everything too slow, or Ryan did, we would miss a whole lot. So we're trying to get to some of these passages of Scripture. It's easy to understand why God included things like Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. It's a bit harder to understand, why do you have to give us so many gory details about the Old Testament? I mean, when you read this stuff this week, there's political maneuvering, there's a lot of murder and death. We have to come up with things like pictures for kids to draw. You try to come up with a picture for kids to draw from these chapters, okay? Would you do another one with somebody killing another person? It's tough. And it feels like, why would God have us go through this kind of material? Because this is not just a history book that you could study like something from the Wars of Thucydides that you could argue about it, but it really makes no difference. This is the Bible given to us, and it's given to us for our instruction. Why would God give us this? So I'm going to try to help us at least understand a little bit what's going on. So in this 2 or 3 chapters, chapter 2, 3, and 4, there's a lot of things that I suspect you have questions on, because I have questions on them. There's things about multiple wives and royal women and how they're used that I have questions on. I would love to have gone down that path. But then there's also questions about war in general and why God is doing this. I would have loved to have gone down that path. And then there's the stuff about how David reacts. And really that's our focus over these weeks, is trying to understand David. So I'm going to go that direction, because how David responds to different people in different places is frankly disconcerting to me. And I want to understand why he does this. And so it's worth thinking about. So I'm not going to go through the whole 2, 3, 4, but let me give you the hopefully 2-minute overview of why this is here. So as you remember, God creates heaven and earth. He places Adam on the earth as the ruler. God's intent is always to rule his creation through an intermediary, through a man, through a king. That's ultimately what he wants to do. And so first it's Adam, and then it goes through things like the prophet Moses and the judges. God's always ruling through his people. And one of the things a ruler does is protect from enemies. That's why you need a king. You need a king to not only lead in righteousness, but to protect from enemies. There's both things going on. And so we go from a transition period of there is no king and there's judges ruling the land. That's the book of Judges. To now we have a king that God has chosen to rule his people. And 1st and 2nd Samuel are talking about that transition period. And so in 1 Samuel, we find out how they go from saying there's no king to asking for a king. Saul is given to them. God chooses Saul, and Saul is rejected as a king because of his sinful behavior. And God then chooses David, a man after his own heart. And so 1 Samuel traces the rise of King Saul and then the decline of King Saul. And then here's David. We talk about the rise of King David. And we're going to hit a peak here in the next few weeks. And then there's going to be problems with David too. And we're going to wonder what happens as David seems to fall. But David is extremely important. There is no man in the Old Testament more important than David if you look at how many times he's talked about. God is the subject of God did this, the most in the Bible. Moses is number 3. Moses did this, Moses did this. Number 2 person is David. David did this, David did this. You just can't overestimate the importance of David. And David is the one who is the Messiah. Because what does Messiah mean? Do you remember what Messiah means? Anointed one. Anointed one. So when we talk about a Messiah, anyone who is anointed could technically be called a Messiah. And so here's David, the one's anointed. He has a high view of Saul, who is anointed, but that Saul is rejected, and now David is the anointed. And he's setting the standard, so to speak. As we continue to look at this, he's setting the standard, the bar. He's being an example so that you look at David, and there's things about David that prepare you to accept nothing less than him. You'll accept more than him, but you'll accept nothing less than him as God's chosen ruler. Okay, so we're in the life of David. Last week, we saw how Saul is now dead. God judged him. He is dead. He's out of the picture. And now David is going to be accepted as king, but he's not accepted as king over all Israel. If you remember, Israel's divided into tribes. Remember how many tribes there are? There's 12 tribes. And so the northern tribes decide they aren't going to follow David, and there's only really one tribe in the south called the tribe of Judah that will follow David. Now, why is the tribe of Judah inclined to follow David? Do you have any quick guesses? Right. And so David is of the tribe of Judah. So people tend to be pretty loyal to family and tribe ties. That actually plays a pretty big thing in our stories about the loyalty to tribes. And Saul, if you remember what tribe Saul is from? Benjamin. That's in the north. And so Saul had tended to favor Benjamin, but everybody in the north is following Saul and not David. So as we study this, you have heard probably over and over again what a good king overall David is. And you accept that David is the rightful king. But not everybody has always done that. And that's really not a surprise. I mean, has there ever been a political leader that everybody agreed on should be in power? Have we had problems with that even in recent history in our nation? Yeah, because not everybody accepts. And so, yes, David ended up being the king of a united Israel. But even toward the end of David's reign, there are still people that say he is wrongly the king. He is wrong. It should have been Saul. And they accused David of wrong. And even later, they're not certain. So just imagine for a minute you're an Israelite 20, 30, 40, 80, 100 years, even after David, and you're wondering, okay, I know David ended up being king, but was it right? Was it right that he was king? And so this book sets the record straight. How do we know that David was called, sent, anointed, protected by God to be king? This traces that story. Okay, so let me spend a few more minutes thinking through how chapters 2, 3, 4 fit together, and then I'm going to focus in on that little passage Paul read, because it's one of the questions I have. I don't know that I'm going to give you a perfectly understandable answer, but I'm struggling, and I want to help you understand as best you can why David is doing this and why I think it's probably a good thing. So, you've read the story, I hope, a few times, but let me summarize some key things. So Saul dies. David asks God, what should I do now? David is told, go to Hebron. Hebron's a major city in Judah. Jerusalem is, the major city, but Jerusalem is not under Israelite control at this time. That's going to be later. So he goes to Hebron, the other major city. It's a city of refuge. He's got connections there. It's a big city. So he goes there. And the tribe of Judah anoints him. So they recognize him as king. So there's going to be lots of family ties going on in these stories. But the next story we hear about is that David hears that certain men from the town of Jabesh Gilead have honored Saul after Saul died. Now that's really interesting because the men of Jabesh Gilead are not from Judah. They're from way up north across the Jordan in a tribe of Manasseh. You kind of expect a king to not appreciate anybody who's loyal to their predecessors, but we know David has been much different. David has never been against Saul. So again, we're setting the record straight. How did David come into power? Was it by intrigue and him manipulating and him taking over? We're going to find out over and over again. No. When he finds out that the men of Jabesh Gilead had honored Saul, he sends to them and says, I appreciate what we've done. I won't forget it. That was good. I honor you. And let it be known, I'm king now of Judah, just so you know. But he does not look down on them. So it's very important that we know that. The next story is that Saul has one remaining son still alive. So Saul had 4 sons. Jonathan's the one you know best. But then there's these other 2, and those 3 have died in the battle. There's one remaining son alive. We don't know why he's alive. Was he not in the battle? We just don't know. That's not told. But his name is Ishbosheth. That's hard for me to say. Bosheth? That comes off my tongue wrongly. Ishbosheth. Do you know what Ishbosheth means? The name means? You sometimes pay attention to this. Ishbosheth means man of shame. You're like, is this an important detail? Well, so I had to do a little digging here. I found out that Ishbosheth is not his regular name. His regular name is Eshbaal, which is a good sounding name. It's something like the fire of the master. It's a good manly sounding name. Ishbosheth means the man of shame. Is it a nickname? Probably. Probably a nickname of some sort, because you don't name your son man of shame. But you do start calling somebody man of shame. So more than likely, it's a nickname because there's really nothing positive that this dude does. At every turn, he's seen as weak, ineffectual, not a good guy. So Ishbosheth is set up as the king. Now, how does he get set up as king? It's because of the military leader named Abner. Abner. Now, I know these names are really confusing. I will probably mix them up in talking about them. But here's what I want you to know now. Saul had a commander named Abner. Abner is his cousin. So you got to know family ties are important here. David has a military leader named Joab. Joab is his nephew. Close family ties and everything here. Now, it feels a little bit like a royal family of Europe because they're all interconnected, because David is also the son-in-law to King Saul. So there's all these connections going on here. But Abner, it says in the stories we read, is making himself great in the house of Saul. He's serving Saul by putting his son, meaning Saul's son, in leadership. Apparently this took some time. As you try to match up the dates, it might have taken a couple years to get Ishbosheth actually solidified as king, but Abner's doing the work. As you read chapters 2 and 3, Abner's doing all the initiating here. A lot of initiating. He's the one who makes the move to get Ishbosheth king. He's the one who initiates battle with David's troops to try to come up there. When the battle goes poorly, he's the one who initiates getting the battle stopped. I'm hoping you read about that. He's the one who initiates peace talks with David. He's the one who initiates peace talks with Israel to join David. He's the one who promises David he'll bring Israel under David's leadership. Now, here's the reason I think this is important. Chapter 2 and 3, all about Abner and Abner's initiation. Why is that important? Because Abner is the only one that could be a real potential threat to David, and Abner's the one who can make the people come to David. He's the real powerhouse here. So if anybody's going to be a threat, it'd be Abner, but if anybody could do good on that side of the fence, it's Abner. Ishbosheth is ineffective. Abner is the one who has the real power here. Now, there's lots of stories here, and you wonder what's Abner really doing. I can't go into those details. You'll have to start looking at it in that light. But getting down to chapter 3 in the middle of our study section here, Abner decides he's going to now support David. So he's going to leave Ishbosheth, and he's going to support David, and he's going to get the people of Israel to go down and support David. So he comes to David and makes peace with David, because he says, who does the land belong to? And you fill in the blank, to Abner. He's the guy in charge. I'll get it for you, David. And David has to make a choice. Are you going to believe Abner or not? What would you do? Well, Joab, David's commander, says, David, you're an idiot. Abner is the military leader. He's working to get himself on at least the top of the top there. You're a fool, David. He came to spy out the land. You let him go? Okay, that makes a little bit of sense as you read the story. Maybe Abner is that way. Or maybe Abner actually is getting the people to come down to David. Now, as I read the story, I think it's a legit thing that Abner is actually switching sides. He's now against Ishbosheth, and he has told the leaders of Israel, let's go down, do this. So he's convinced the elders of Israel. So that to me says he's actually legitimately coming down. But that's in one sense neither here nor there. What I want you to see is that Abner is now coming to David, says, I want to make a covenant with you, and David agrees. That's what I want you to see. David agrees. And the text says 3 times, it's like the author wants you to really get this home. The text says 3 times David sent Abner away in peace. It says it 3 times. He sent him away in peace. He sent him away in peace. He sent him away in peace. Was there any sort of conflict between Abner and David at this point? No. Did Abner get David's confidence? Yes. That's where the story ends. And it says at this point, Joab comes in from a raid and he finds out this. Abner, I mean, this is the stuff movies are made out of, because David has made a feast for Abner, has accepted his peace talks and has said, okay, you're going to bring Israel now under me. Okay, he sends him away. He gets about 2 miles away. Abner gets about 2 miles away, and Joab comes. And Joab confronts David. You're an idiot, David. You can't do this. And it doesn't say how David responds at this point, but Joab then goes secretly, calls Abner back, brings Abner down, and then kills him in cold-blooded murder. Now, there's a reason why the text says he does this. At least 2 we can see. 1, apparently he's fearful of Abner being a player politically. So that's what he tells David. But the text tells us he kills Abner because Abner had killed Joab's brother. So if you've read chapter 2, you know how that came about. There was a battle. Joab's brother wouldn't do anything except chase Abner. Abner actually says twice, stop. I don't want to kill you. I'm trying not to kill you. I could never talk to your brother again. Leave off, okay? So Abner is the one that says, I don't want to do this. Abishai, Joab's brother, continues to do it. And so Abner does something that apparently was meant to get him out of commission, but ended up killing him, hitting him with the butt end of a spear. But it's a time of war. You expect people to die in a time of war. But what happens later on in Joab killing Abner in cold blood, nobody approves of. But you can see Joab might have said, I'm an avenger of blood. There's provisions in the Old Testament. If you kill someone, the close relative can come and avenge the blood. That's what I did. And Joab might have been able to convince a few people, like, yeah, you're right. You're an avenger of blood. You had every right to kill this man because he killed your brother. Until it's pointed out, well, that was a battle. This is not. And everybody knows there's a difference between a battle and times of peace. Okay, so it makes pretty clear what's going on in these chapters. Now, to move forward after this, Ishbosheth himself is murdered, and then David kills the murderers of that one. So we've got lots of murder going on here. Lots of murder. So, let's focus on David now in these verses, especially the ones that Paul read. It's clear in the text that the author wants to exonerate David from any wrongdoing. The author wants you to know that David is not complicit in Abner's death, just like he wasn't complicit in Saul's death, just like he was not complicit in Ishbosheth's, the next king, death. He wants to show that David is not guilty here. So it tells us that David did not know Joab had called Abner back to kill him. It tells us that when David hears of the matter, he immediately says, I and my kingdom are guiltless, and he condemns Joab, remember his nephew, and puts a curse on Joab's family, which is basically putting a curse on his relatives. He explicitly says it was wrong. He calls them wicked. Then he mourns Abner, and he commands Joab. He says, Joab, you just murdered him. I want you to start mourning now. And he makes him follow him behind. He's walking behind the bier, weeping. He goes to the grave. He weeps. Then he fasts. This is probably all happening within 24 hours because burials happen pretty fast. But he wants everybody to know he did not approve of this. And it makes sense because he really didn't. He had actually accepted Abner. He had sent Abner away in peace. So he mourns Abner. He fasts. He weeps. And then the text specifically says here that when the people heard of what he was doing and fasting and weeping and not eating the food and explicitly saying these things, they knew he didn't cause the death of Abner. And so the text says the people knew it then, and therefore you should know now, David is not complicit in Abner's death. It's a big point. And apparently the people are satisfied with that. And the author is satisfied leaving it there. I'm suspecting you, as you've read this, are like me, and you have a question now. Because did David really do enough here? Because you've just read a story about how David, when he heard that Saul had been killed by the hand of this Amalekite, what did he do to this Amalekite? Killed him. Later on in chapter 4, the one we didn't get to read, but you have read, Ishbosheth, Saul's son, is murdered, and then those two murderers come and say, we've killed him, now the crown is yours, and what does David do to them? Kills them. But now we have David, who says Abner is not sinful, has done right, and Joab, his military leader, kills him, and what does Abner do? He curses him, saying, may you and your family forever have problems, but he doesn't kill him. Does that seem inconsistent to you? Because it seems inconsistent to me at that point. So that's what I want to think about for our last minutes here. Again, to be clear, it doesn't seem like the text has any problem here. The text says the people are pleased with how David's responding here. So on that level, I got to start with a belief that David's probably doing right. If the people are pleased here, they know things that I probably am not privy to, and they're pleased with this. Okay, I'm going to be pleased with this. That's the direction I'm inclined to go at this point, just for that reason. I do see that David knows Joab deserves to die, not only because he calls it wickedness, But later on, many years later, when he passes off the kingdom to his son Solomon, he brings up this issue, and he brings up this issue and another thing Joab does and says, he deserves to be punished. And so David acknowledges later on that Joab should be punished, severely apparently. But what's going on here? If David knows Joab deserves to die, why didn't David execute him? That's my question. So, as I read this now, here's the text that I want to understand best. It's after David mourns, and he says this. Verse 38, so 2 Samuel 3:38. After all these events, death, burial, David's mourning, Abner's death. And the king said to his servants, verse 38, do you not know that a prince and a great man has fallen this day in Israel? That's Abner. He calls Abner. The word prince doesn't mean that he's like next in line. It just is referring to the fact that he is an important great man. And then David says, and I was gentle today, though anointed king. So he's explaining his actions. These men, the sons of Zeruiah, that's Joab and his brother Abishai, are more severe than I. The Lord repaid the evildoer according to his wickedness. And he said twice, these are the evildoers. So we know what he means. So here's the question. What does it mean that David calls himself gentle and the sons of Zeruiah are more severe than I? Now, does anybody here have an NIV or something like that? So you're going to see that they take a little different way to translate this. So that's how the NIV translates this. So as you do studies and you read a bunch of different translations, you're going to find out some are translating it like the ESV does. I was gentle today. They are more severe. And then you're going to have ones like NIV that says this. And today, though I am anointed king, I am weak. And these sons of Zeruiah are too strong for me. So here's option A that the ESV takes. ESV says, David says, I am gentle, and they're not. They're severe. Or the other way to look at it is, I would like to get rid of Joab, but politically, I can't handle that. Or, he's the military leader. I'm not. I am too weak at this point in my reign to do anything about it. They're too tough. So those are the two options that textually we go with. So how would we choose between there? At this point, I think the ESV has the better understanding. Now, why do I think the ESV, that he says he's gentle? Well, one is for this word gentle. The word gentle here is a word meaning soft or tender. So it's used in a couple different ways. It's only used 16 times in the Old Testament, but it can be used of a calf that's tender and ready to eat. It can be used of children who you don't want to push too hard because they're tender, they're soft. It's also used of men who would normally not do anything harsh toward another person. They're tender. Or it's about men who don't want to go into battle because they're tender. They're not out there and are not willing to go through the killing. And so it doesn't seem like this is the word meaning I am weak politically or something like that. You know David's really not. He is the man who's killed his 10,000s. He is not a weak man in any way, shape, or form. And he is very clear that this is wrong. So it makes more sense to me that the ESV is right in translating it something like not weak, but tender or gentle. This fits with David's life. For example, later on, he uses a different word, but he tells Joab to be gentle. It's a different word, but gentle with his son Absalom. So there, you do see something about David's heart that is very tender in these moments. So tender makes more, and he also says these sons of Zeruiah, Joab is more severe than I, and he's referring back to how he and Joab have handled Abner. I was soft toward Abner. Joab was harsh or severe toward Abner. It makes a little more sense to me that David sees himself as tender or gentle toward that. And so what did Joab do? He was severe in that he murdered Abner, even though what he was murdering him for had happened back in a battle. He was severe. He was like, this is justice. And David says, I'm willing to take the risk. I'm willing to take the risk here. And so I lean toward that this text is saying that David is intentionally being gentle and kind to Abner in a time of peace because he came wishing to make amends. He's willing to accept that. So was David wrong for not judging Joab quickly? Well, this is kind of the pattern. He didn't judge Abner quickly. Now, again, it's hard for me to see the difference between how he's treating the murderers of Saul and of Ishbosheth, but there are lots of more details that he knew that I don't know. And so I'm going to take it that David does not punish Joab. He calls him wicked. He calls him wicked. And I see that as a clue that David, as the king, is making a tough call here. Kings, and those in leadership in general, but kings have extremely difficult decisions to make. And it appears to me that David at this time is both at the same time being gentle and forbearing and at the same time not turning a blind eye. He's doing both. I don't know enough about this situation to know if he did enough, but the text does not seem to me to say he did something wrong here. The people agreed that this was good. And it exonerates David from wrongdoing. That's the point of the text. So it seems to me that David is not wrong here. The responsibility of the king is so great. The king does not always mete out the full punishment people deserve. And once I start to think about the king does not always mete out the full punishment deserved. Did Abner deserve to die? Well, at one level, maybe so. He had set up Ishbosheth as a rival king. He had been fighting David for years. Did Abner deserve to die? Possibly at one level, but David doesn't go down that road. He says, I'm going to be forbearing here. I'm going to be tender here toward him. Not like Joab. Joab's a man of war, and I don't think that's right here. And so David sets the precedence I see here as one who is not turning a blind eye to evil, but choosing at certain times to forbear and be gentle. And if that's what's expected of the Messiah, the anointed king, that he is going to, at the right times, be gentle and forbearing when he has every right to be harsh, that does set me up to say, like, yeah, Jesus seemed to do that really well. Because you can see all the times that Jesus would have been perfectly within his rights to pour out justice and judgment. Do you remember that story where Jesus is going to Jerusalem and he goes through a town of Samaria and the Samaritans don't accept him, and the two lovely disciples, James and John, says, should we call down fire on this town and burn them all up? Well, maybe it was really deserved. They'd rejected Jesus. But what does Jesus say? No. He rebukes them. There seems to be that time. Jesus was really good at forbearing. Does that mean Jesus always forbears? No, because you will see over and over again that at the right time, Jesus will destroy all those who have resisted. But it is right to forbear at certain times. And Jesus does that extraordinarily well. And so that's why I think it makes a little more sense to not see this as an evidence that David is a waffler, David is a political maneuverer, David is too weak. I see it at this point, the text says, it seems to say he did what was right here. And we think, why did he do it this here and this here? Well, kings make tough decisions, and he has a disposition to be gentle here. And that was right in this case. And it sets the bar that Jesus far surpassed, but nonetheless the bar is being set, because you know, in the later stories, if we could look at some of the other examples, some of the kings that come to power later in life, they go to every effort to eliminate the competition. Athaliah is a particular queen that was brutal in how she eliminated all of the royal family, her royal family. But Jesus doesn't do that. He forbears. David didn't do that in a remarkable way, so that when David does become king of both Israel in the north and Judah in the south, nobody can look at him and say he was a political maneuverer. He was he was vicious in how he did this. He was unethical in how he did this. Everybody will look and say, who knew it at the time, he did what was right. And it sets us up for a precedent. And so I think even now for us, if we would see this as a good thing, I want us to consider how being just all the time isn't an appropriate display of power. It's not. It is a one who has power that can say at this point, I'm going to be tender, and that's good. That's good. And so we don't always need to be people that just be the just person. Justice will come. It will come. It's right to come. But David gives us a clue as to when it can be postponed and be gentle. Okay, so there's one aspect of a very difficult passage. We're going to get into more, but if you have questions, of course, one of the best places to do it in a life group, so that's what we do in our life group. We talk about what in the world just went on there, and we try to understand a little bit more. So whether it's there or another time, it's difficult to understand sometimes, or many times, a narrative like this because we're looking for clues. It's so different than our culture, but it's there, and God has it for us. Let's try to learn from it, and that's what we're attempting to do here. Lord, thank you so much for this text. Even though it's so difficult for us to understand, I ask that you would raise our views of Jesus because we couldn't have figured out how to live life back in David's time, nor could we figure out how to live life during Jesus' day. And because we have trouble even in our own day, constantly we come up with situations that we don't know what to do. And so we admit our need for a leader who knows and always does what is right. And Lord, our world is falling apart. In many respects, our lives are falling apart, and we turn to Jesus, the one who has done all things right, and to his Spirit who guides us. We ask for wisdom to do what is right, even as we rely on the one who has always done all things right. And in Christ's name we pray this. Amen.